"In the cleaner's son knows how to play the piano," shouted the millionaire CEO, Rodrigo, to impress his partners. He humiliated Sonia, the cleaner, and challenged her teenage son, Gabriel, to play the grand piano in the middle of the company party. The boy silently sat at the piano and began to play a Chopin masterpiece with a perfection that shocked everyone. Then, the world-famous conductor, guest of honor at the party, stood up pale, walked to the stage, and knelt in front of the boy, and what he said next ruined the millionaire. The air in the Sterling Capital headquarters was thin, dense with the scent of expensive cologne and the power that money exudes. Sonia felt the weight of the environment on her shoulders, a burden added to the exhaustion of a full day's work. Beside her, her son Gabriel, with his shoulders slumped and his gaze lowered, wiped a soft cloth over an almost invisible smudge on the marble baseboard. To the guests of that evening's gala, they were less than ghosts. They were part of the furniture, anonymous figures whose only function was to maintain the illusion of impeccable perfection that Warren Sterling, the host so cherished, the multi-billionaire who had built his immense fortune on aggressive Wall Street investments, loved to display his assets and success, and this party was the apex of his self-celebration. Every detail, from the bubbling champagne to the modern art on the walls, was a testament to his vast wealth. Sonia glanced at her son, and her heart ached. Gabriel was a good boy, quiet and a dreamer, but in this place, he seemed even more fragile. She just wanted to finish the job and take him home, far from the indifferent stares of the Manhattan elite. The hall, once loud with chatter about stocks and dividends, began to fall silent. Sterling was climbing onto the stage, a microphone in hand, the predatory smile of a man who knows he is the center of the universe. Beside him, with a contrasting posture of dignity, stood Maestro Costello, a living legend of classical music and the guest of honor. Sterling planned to announce a multi-million-dollar sponsorship of the Maestro's orchestra, another investment to polish his public image. In a moment of pause, as Sterling pontificated on the importance of capital in art, Gabriel's eyes drifted. On the stage, imposing and majestic, a Steinway grand piano gleamed under the lights. To Gabriel, it wasn't just an object, it was an entire universe. He stopped what he was doing, the forgotten cloth in his hand, his mouth slightly agape in silent reverence. It was a moment of pure admiration, a second of truce in his reality, but that second was enough. Sterling, with his hawk-like eyes, caught the scene from the stage. He saw an opportunity not for generosity, but for spectacle. He interrupted his own speech, and a cruel smile formed on his lips. "What's the matter, kid? Like the new toy?" His voice boomed through the hall, amplified by the microphone, cutting through the silence like a knife. Every head turned. Suddenly, Sonia and Gabriel were no longer invisible. They were the center of an unwanted arena. Sonia's face burned with shame. She pulled her son's arm, trying to drag him back into the shadows, into the safe invisibility of before. "Let's go, honey," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Sterling wasn't finished. "Does the cleaner's son know how to play piano?" he continued, mockery dripping from every syllable. "Come on, get up there, play a note for us, if you even know which one is which. Ha ha ha." His laugh echoed, followed by muffled snickers from the audience. Sonia felt tears stinging her eyes. The humiliation was a bitter taste in her mouth. "Sir, please," she begged in a thin voice. Sterling shot her a glare. "That's an order, or your mother's out of a job by morning." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Sonia's world crumbled. Her job was all they had. She squeezed Gabriel's arm tighter, a gesture of desperation, but to her surprise, her son pulled away from her grasp. There was a frightening calm in his eyes, a dignity she had never seen before. He didn't look at Sterling, nor at the crowd staring them down. He looked only at the piano, with a silent determination that hushed the entire hall. Gabriel straightened his back. He took one step forward, then another, the sound of his worn sneakers a sacrilege on the polished marble. Without a word, he began to walk toward the stage. Gabriel's footsteps echoed in the deadly silence of the hall. Each one was a drumbeat in Sonia's heart as she watched, paralyzed from her corner. The world seemed to have shrunk, containing only her son and the wooden and ivory monster on the stage. She saw his straight back, a composure that belied the storm she knew was raging in his chest. Sterling, from his pedestal, crossed his arms with a mocking smirk. The humiliation he had planned was unfolding perfectly. He imagined the boy playing a single, discordant note, maybe two, before running off in tears, proving his point, that certain things, like art and wealth, belong to a world to which these people would never have access. Maestro Costello, for his part, observed with an expression of polite boredom. He had come to discuss a major investment, not to witness a spectacle of petty cruelty. To him, this was just an unpleasant delay. Gabriel reached the piano. He didn't hesitate. He slid onto the bench with a fluidity that surprised everyone. For a moment, his fingers hovered over the keys. Like birds about to take flight, his eyes closed, and then he played. It wasn't a hesitant note, it wasn't a simple melody, it was an explosion. The beginning of Chopin's revolutionary etude, a torrent of notes that cascaded up and down the keyboard with a fury and precision that was simply impossible. Sterling's smile froze and then shattered. Maestro Costello's boredom evaporated, replaced by an electric shock. In the hall, jaws dropped. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. The music pouring from the piano wasn't just technically perfect, it had a soul. It carried the frustration of years of silence, the pain of poverty, a fierce love for his mother, and the desperate dream of a different world. The piece, notorious for its difficulty, seemed effortless in his hands. His fingers didn't move, they danced, a choreography of passion and pain that told a story without words. The speed was breathtaking. The clarity, crystalline. The low notes resonated with the force of thunder, while the high notes shone like lightning. The music filled every inch of the hall, vibrating through the building's steel frame, making the crystals on the chandeliers tremble subtly. Sonia, in her corner, began to cry. These were not tears of shame, but of a pride so overwhelming it hurt. She knew of her son's talent, of course. She had seen him play on old keyboards, on pianos in department stores when no one was looking. But never like this, never with this freedom, this fury, this transcendent beauty. She was witnessing the blossoming of a soul she had nurtured in secret. Gabriel was completely immersed, oblivious to the audience, the luxury, the humiliation. He and the piano were one. The outside world had vanished. There was only the music, the raw, powerful truth flowing through him. The piece surged toward its climax, a cascade of complex and passionate notes that seemed impossible for a single human to execute. And then, with the same intensity it began, the music ceased. The final note, powerful and definitive, hung in the air for a long moment before dissolving into the stillness. Gabriel opened his eyes. His hands still rested on the keys. The silence that followed was deeper, heavier than any sound. No one applauded. No one dared to breathe. The silence in the Sterling Capitol Hall was a living entity, thick and charged with an energy no one could decipher. The shock was palpable. The guests, New York's financial elite, who minutes before had been smirking at the situation, were now petrified. Their faces showed a mixture of disbelief and stunned admiration. They had come expecting a night of wealth and power displays, discussions of cash flow and portfolio returns, but were confronted with something infinitely more valuable and utterly unexpected. Warren Sterling remained on the stage, his mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face. His arrogance, The pillar upon which he had built his empire had shattered into 1,000 pieces against the wall of sound that Boy had erected. He didn't understand what had just happened, but he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Control of the situation. Something he valued above any asset in his portfolio had been stolen from him. Then a movement broke the spell. Maestro Costello, who had been in the front row, rose slowly to his feet. His face was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on Gabriel. He didn't look like a music critic. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a miracle or seen a ghost. He didn't clap. Instead, he climbed the stage steps with a solemn urgency. Sterling took an instinctive step back, a growing confusion in his eyes. To the absolute shock of every billionaire and multimillionaire present, the legendary maestro, a man revered in every major opera house in the world, walked over to Gabriel and knelt. The image was so surreal, it felt like a collective hallucination. The great Costello, on one knee, before the cleaner's son. "You," the maestro stammered, his voice thick with emotion, barely able to form the words. "I don't believe it. 5 years ago, I saw an anonymous YouTube video of a boy playing a broken keyboard in a subway station in the outer boroughs. The subway phantom. The memory of that video was an obsession for Costello, a search that had taken him across the globe. I looked for you in every conservatory in the world, in every music school. It was you. It wasn't a question, but a statement heavy with years of frustrated searching. Gabriel, still catching his breath from the performance, just nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. The silent confirmation was all the maestro needed. He stood up, the reverence on his face transforming into an icy fury. He turned to Sterling, and the contempt in his gaze was so sharp that the host physically flinched. "Mr. Sterling." Costello's voice was low, but it resonated with an authority no amount of capital could buy. "I came here tonight to discuss a sponsorship to find the future of music." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "And you, in your ignorance and arrogance, were using the future of music to mop your floors." The hall's silence was broken by shocked murmurs. Sterling's humiliation was now complete and undeniably public. "The sponsorship is cancelled," Costello declared, the sentence final and irrevocable. He then turned back to Gabriel, and his expression softened. He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture of protection and promise. He looked him in the eye and said the words that would change everything. "Kid, you don't have to hide anymore. The Berlin Philharmonic is waiting for you." The high-pitched ringing in Sonia's ears was the only thing she could hear as they left through the back of the Sterling Capitol building. The luxury of the marble hall gave way to the cold concrete and the smell of garbage in the service alley. Gabriel was beside her, silent, the warmth of Maestro Costello's hand still seeming to linger on his shoulder. The words Berlin Philharmonic echoed in Sonia's mind, a phrase so foreign and out of place in her reality that it seemed to belong to another language, another universe. The ride home on the crowded bus that swayed through the streets of New York was a blur. They arrived at their small apartment in Queens, a sanctuary of simplicity and love amidst the concrete jungle. The contrast with the opulence of the party was dizzying. Here, there were no crystal chandeliers, just a bare light bulb. There was no fine art, only bills stuck to the fridge. Sonia sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. Gabriel went to his room, the small space that barely fit his bed and an old keyboard, a gift from his late father. She could hear him sit on the bed, the familiar creak of the springs. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unasked questions. Berlin. The word was an abyss. How could they? She was a cleaner. The money she earned barely covered rent and food. The idea of crossing the ocean, of living in a country whose language she didn't speak, was terrifying. Who was this maestro, really? Could they trust him? The world of the rich was a dangerous place. She had learned the hard way tonight. Maybe this was just another game, a different kind of humiliation. Her fears were a complex web, woven with the thread of poverty and distrust. And there was Gabriel. This was his dream, she knew. But he was her boy. The thought of handing him over to an unknown world, so far from her, was a physical pain. Later, Gabriel came to the kitchen and sat across from her. "Mom," he said, his voice soft. "Are you okay?" Sonia looked at her son's face, so young yet burdened with the maturity that life had forced upon him. "I don't know, honey. I just don't know." "I won't go if you don't want me to," he said, and she knew it was true. He would sacrifice his dream for her without hesitation, and that knowledge broke her heart even more. The next morning, still lost in a sea of doubt, Sonia was visited by Mrs. Rosa, her next-door neighbor, a woman with white hair and a heart of gold. After listening to Sonia's confused and emotional story, Mrs. Rosa held her hands. "Sonia, fear is a cage," the old woman said wisely. "Sometimes the door opens, but we're so afraid of what's outside that we'd rather stay locked in." The words comforted her, but didn't dispel the fog. That evening, while tidying a drawer, Sonia found what she was looking for. It was an old photograph, its edges worn with time. In it, a younger man, with the same dreamy eyes as Gabriel, smiled as he held a guitar. Her late husband, a talented musician who never got his chance, whose music was silenced by the hardships of life. Looking at the photo was like a stab to the heart. She felt a wave of determination. She couldn't let the same happen to Gabriel, but with the resolution came a new wave of panic, stronger and colder than before. She was deciding his future. A future she didn't understand and from which she couldn't protect him. In a penthouse high above Manhattan, the silence was different. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but the stillness of impotent fury. Warren Sterling stood before the glass wall of his office. Looking out at the city lights, he believed he ruled. The humiliation of the previous night burned in his stomach like acid. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scene, the maestro on his knees, the contempt on his face, the murmurs of the crowd. His reputation, carefully built with every successful trade and every million added to his net worth, had been tarnished by a nobody, his cleaner's son. The irony was unbearable. He, a billionaire who understood the intricacies of the stock market, who dealt in dollars and euros as if they were pocket change, who even diversified part of his fortune in volatile assets like crypto, had been defeated by a song. The anger was a beast inside him, clawing to get out. He wanted to destroy, to crush, to prove that in the end, money always won. The idea that pure talent could triumph over the capital he so idolized was a personal affront. He grabbed a glass of expensive whiskey and hurled it against the opposite wall. The sound of shattering crystal gave him a momentary, empty satisfaction. Firing Sonia was his first impulse, but he knew he couldn't. The story was already starting to leak. Firing her now would be a PR disaster, a confirmation of his villainy. No, he had to be smarter. He had to use the same tools he used in business, find a weakness, a vulnerability, and exploit it without mercy. He needed a way to apply pressure, to show them who really held the power, to reassert that their world still revolved around his will and his cash flow. He called his lawyer, a man known for his skill in navigating the gray areas of the law. "I want everything on her," Sterling snarled into the phone. "Sonia, the cleaner, and her son, Gabriel. Every bill, every debt, every relative. I don't care how small. Find something I can use." For the next 2 days, Sterling barely slept. He obsessively monitored mentions of his name online, watched his company's stock price flutter with the rumors. The financial loss was minimal, almost insignificant to his vast fortune, but the blow to his ego was monumental. He felt exposed, ridiculed. He needed to reverse the narrative, turn the victim into the guilty party, the hero into a problem. He needed ammunition. The call from his lawyer came at the end of the second day. "I found something," the lawyer said, his voice smug. "It's not much, but it could be enough. An old medical debt in her late husband's name, from a private hospital. The debt was sold to a collection agency, one of the really aggressive ones. Legally, they're right at the deadline to execute." A slow, cruel smile spread across Sterling's face. It was perfect. It wasn't a crime. It was just business. It was the language he understood, the law of the strongest, of the creditor over the debtor. "Buy the debt," Sterling ordered. "Buy the collection agency if you have to. I want that debt. And then execute it. With interest." The revenge wouldn't be loud like a breaking glass. It would be quiet and bureaucratic, an official letter, a legal notice, a piece of paper that could destroy their future before it even began. The smell of fresh coffee and Mrs. Rosa's cornbread filled Sonia's small apartment, an aroma of normalcy in the midst of the whirlwind. Maestro Costello's visit, scheduled for that morning, felt like an event from another planet. Sonia had cleaned the apartment 3 times, her anxiety making her hands shake. When the doorbell rang, it was Gabriel who opened it. The maestro, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, seemed to fill the entire doorframe. He entered with a gentle smile, his eyes taking in the modest surroundings with respect, not pity. The initial awkwardness quickly dissipated. Costello didn't act like an aristocrat. He sat at the kitchen table, praised Mrs. Rosa's cornbread, and spoke to Sonia not as a benefactor, but as an equal. He explained every detail of the plan. The scholarship from the Berlin Philharmonic was all-inclusive. It would cover all tuition, materials, and private lessons. There would be an apartment for her and Gabriel, paid for by the foundation. She would receive a monthly stipend, enough so she wouldn't have to work and could adjust, maybe even study German. "Sonia," he said, his voice calm and persuasive, "Gabriel's talent is a rarity. It's like finding a raw diamond of the highest quality. Our job is just to cut and polish it. And the most important setting for a young artist is the peace of mind of knowing their family is safe and well." His eyes landed on the photo of Sonia's husband on the shelf. "Was he a musician?" he asked softly. Sonia nodded, tears welling up. "He would have been so proud," she whispered. "He is," the maestro replied. "And it's because of the love and strength he left in you that Gabriel has become who he is." In that moment, Sonia's wall of fear began to crumble. She looked at Gabriel, who was listening with a quiet, shining hope in his eyes. She felt she could trust this man. The cage Mrs. Rosa had spoken of had its door wide open. She took a deep breath, ready to take the first step out, ready to say yes. But just then, a sound interrupted the moment. Someone was sliding an envelope under the door. Gabriel got up to get it. It was an official-looking envelope with a seal and cold, impersonal language. He handed it to his mother. Sonia opened it with still trembling fingers. The words leaped off the page, cold and sharp as shards of glass. Notice of debt execution and eviction order. Her blood ran cold. The debt, her husband's old hospital bill, a forgotten liability from a time of desperation, and she thought had been lost to time. The amount, inflated by years of compounded interest, was astronomical, far beyond anything she could ever dream of paying. She didn't need to be a financial expert to understand the sentence. The document was clear. They had 30 days to pay the full amount or vacate the property. 30 days. The air seemed to be sucked out of her lungs. The dream of Berlin, the promise of a brilliant future, all of it crumbled to dust. How could they fly to a new beginning if they were about to be thrown onto the street with no home and no hope? The cruelty of the blow was diabolical in its precision. It was Sterling's invisible hand using his capital to crush them from afar. The maestro looked at Sonia's pale face, at the paper trembling in her hand, and the hope that had lit up the small room moments before was extinguished, replaced by the cold, familiar shadow of despair. The despair that settled over Sonia's apartment was a cold, sticky fog. The eviction notice on the kitchen table seemed to mock them, a paper monument to Warren Sterling's cruelty. For 2 days, Sonia moved through the apartment like an automaton, the fear of homelessness paralyzing her thoughts. Maestro Costello had promised to help, to get the foundation's lawyers involved, but the legal process was slow, and the threat was immediate. The story of what happened at the gala, however, did not stay contained within the walls of Sterling Capital. It started as a whisper among the staff, then leaked as gossip among the elite, and finally found its way to a young blogger who wrote about social injustices in New York City. He published a short, anonymous post about the tycoon and the young prodigy. That post was read by Mrs. Rosa. The woman's indignation was the spark that lit the fire. She would not stand by and watch Sonia and Gabrielle, whom she considered family, be crushed. She marched door to door in her building and the neighborhood, telling the story with the passion of a lioness defending her cubs. The community, made up of laborers, small business owners, and retirees, people who knew Sonia's kindness and saw the quiet light in Gabriel, responded. An injustice against one of them was an affront to them all. The idea came up spontaneously. During a chat at the corner bakery, a benefit concert, an event in the small community center hall to raise funds. They weren't aiming for the astronomical amount of the debt, but enough to hire a lawyer to give Sonia some breathing room, some hope. Word spread. The bakery owner donated the food. The corner florist did the decorations. Everyone wanted to help. They asked Gabriel to play. He hesitated. Playing on the Sterling Capital stage had been an act of defiance. Playing for his neighbors, for the people who had watched him grow up, felt infinitely more terrifying. But seeing the determination in Mrs. Rosa's eyes and the support of his community, he agreed. The night of the benefit concert arrived. The hall was packed. There were no tuxedos or ball gowns, just honest faces and open hearts. When Gabriel walked onto the small, improvised stage and sat at a borrowed electric keyboard, the silence was one of anticipation and affection. He didn't play Chopin. He played a simple melody, a lullaby his father had composed for him years ago. The music was pure, without the fury of the other night, but with an emotional depth that spoke directly to the soul. It spoke of love, loss, longing, and hope. Every note was a drop of truth, and the audience felt it. Silent tears streamed down many faces. It was their music, their story. At the end of the performance, the ovation was warm and long. As people placed their contributions, small bills and coins, into a shoebox, something unexpected was happening. At the back of the hall, leaning against the wall, was a woman no one recognized. She was a journalist for a major newspaper who had come on a whim, following up on the small blog's tip, expecting a trivial human interest story. But what she found was something far more profound. She hadn't just heard music, she had witnessed the power of a community, the triumph of the human spirit over the arrogance of power. With tear-reddened eyes, she approached Mrs. Rosa. "I have to tell this story," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "The whole world needs to know what happened here tonight." The article ran in the Sunday edition of the paper, taking up 2 full pages in the lifestyle section. The headline was simple and powerful: "The Symphony of Humiliation and the Song of Hope." The journalist held nothing back. With emotional, detailed prose, she recounted the night at the Sterling Capital event, contrasting Sterling's billion-dollar net worth, his hedge funds and stock trades, with Sonia's quiet dignity and Gabriel's volcanic talent. The story of the Subway Phantom was revealed, Maestro Costello's search, and the climax of Sterling's public shaming. But the article didn't stop there. It described the cruel retaliation, the use of an old medical debt as a weapon, and culminated in the touching scene of the community benefit concert, the union of ordinary people against the injustice of a powerful man. The story was a modern-day David and Goliath tale, and it resonated deeply with the public. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. By Monday morning, the story had gone viral. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Gabriel and Sonia. Television news shows picked up the story. The newspaper's inbox was flooded with messages from moved readers. A crowdfunding campaign was started online, not by Sonia or anyone they knew, but by an anonymous reader. Within hours, the goal to pay off the debt was met and then surpassed. The money kept pouring in. Donations of $10, $50, $100, coming from every corner of the country and even abroad. They were ordinary people who saw a reflection of their own struggles in Sonia's fight. By the end of the day, the amount raised was more than 10 times the value of the debt. Sonia stared at the growing number on the computer screen at Mrs. Rosa's house in disbelief. Each donation was a vote of confidence, a hug from a stranger. She, who had spent her entire life feeling invisible, was now at the center of a wave of solidarity. It was bewildering and wonderful. Meanwhile, Warren Sterling's empire began to feel the impact. His company's name was now associated with cruelty and abuse of power. Digital activists called for a boycott of his businesses. Reputation, an intangible but priceless asset, was being destroyed. At the opening bell of the stock market that morning, Sterling Capital's shares took a dip. It wasn't a catastrophic fall, but it was symbolic. It was the market reacting not to a financial report, but to the moral bankruptcy of its leader. Sterling, who had always believed that profit was paramount, was learning a bitter lesson. Sometimes, human decency has a price that not even his entire fortune could cover. Sonia, watching the snowstorm of notifications on her borrowed phone, finally understood. Sterling's power came from his capital, from his assets. But the power that was saving her came from a very different place. It came from empathy, from compassion, from shared humanity. It was a form of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars or euros. But at that moment, it felt like the only kind that truly mattered. Warren Sterling was marooned in his fortress of glass and steel. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, but he ignored the calls. They were partners, investors, board members, all panicking over the public relations firestorm he had unleashed. The story of Gabriel and Sonia was no longer a footnote. It was the lead story on every news site. He had become a caricature of a villain, the symbol of the arrogance of the super-rich. His name was Mud. He tried to issue an official statement through his press office, a cold declaration talking about misunderstandings and distorted contexts, but it only threw more fuel on the fire. With every passing hour, the hole he was in grew deeper. He couldn't understand it. He had played by the rules of the world as he knew it. Power subjugates, money commands. How could it have gone so wrong? In the oppressive silence of his office, surrounded by the symbols of his wealth, artworks worth a fortune, reports showing the exponential growth of his assets, his mind betrayed him. A flashback, vivid and painful, transported him far from the penthouse. He was 10 years old, a skinny boy from a poor family, wearing shoes with holes in them. He was at the birthday party of a rich classmate. There was a piano in the living room. He, who loved music, had timidly approached it and touched a single key. The birthday boy's father, a large man with a booming voice, saw him. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" The man had yelled for everyone to hear. "That's not for the likes of you. Get back to your corner before you break something." The humiliation burned him, scarring him forever. That day, he swore to himself he would never be the humiliated one again. He would be the one who humiliated others. He would have so much money, so much power, that no one would ever dare speak to him that way again. He would own the piano, own the party, own everything. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He saw in his own face the same contempt as the man from his childhood. In Maestro Costello, he saw the authority figure who had judged him. And in Gabriel, he saw himself, the skinny, frightened boy at the piano. The realization was so horrific it made him nauseous. He had become the very monster that created him. He had spent his entire life accumulating capital, assets, gold, crypto, a mountain of wealth to protect himself from that old pain, but all he had managed to do was recreate it for someone else. The irony was crushing. He was alone, at the top of his financial empire, poorer than he had ever been. His vast fortune couldn't buy him an ounce of peace, couldn't erase the image of the maestro's disdainful gaze, nor the sound of that boy's music. For the first time in decades, Warren Sterling didn't feel anger. He felt a deep, desolate emptiness. Money had built his walls, but he now realized it was also his prison. With the debt paid by the generosity of thousands of strangers and an extra sum tucked away in a savings account for emergencies, the path to Berlin was clear. The reality of the move set in, bringing with it a bittersweet mix of excitement and melancholy. The small apartment, which had once felt like a trap, now revealed itself as a treasure chest of memories. Every object held a story. Sonia spent her days boxing up their lives, a process that was as much emotional as it was physical. She found Gabriel's first drawings, a report card with perfect grades, her husband's old guitar leaning in a corner. She decided the guitar would go with them to Berlin. It was an heirloom, a piece of their roots that needed to be transplanted along with them. The goodbyes were the hardest part. Saying farewell to Mrs. Rosa was like leaving a piece of her heart behind. They held each other for a long time at the apartment door, crying and laughing at the same time. "Write to me, always," the old woman said, her eyes misty. "And don't you worry about us. We'll take care of each other, like we always do." The community organized a farewell party in the same hall as the benefit concert. This time, the mood wasn't one of desperation, but of celebration. There was music, food, and many hugs. Gabriel, now a local celebrity, was treated with an affection that made him blush. The people who had seen him as a quiet boy now looked at him with pride and admiration. He felt the weight of those expectations, but also the strength that came from that collective love. He was no longer alone in his dream. He carried the dreams of an entire community with him. Maestro Costello handled all the bureaucracy, passports, visas, plane tickets. He called every week to check on them, his voice always calm and reassuring. To Sonia, he was a guardian angel, a lighthouse in an unknown sea. On their last day in New York, mother and son made a silent pilgrimage. They went to the subway station where Gabriel, as a child, used to play on a broken keyboard he would find there. It was where the subway phantom had been born. The place was the same, loud and chaotic. They stood on the platform, watching the anonymous crowd. No one knew that this ordinary-looking teenager was the boy from the video who had enchanted a maestro on the other side of the world. It was a secret that belonged only to them and to that place. "Thanks, Mom," Gabriel said suddenly, looking at her, "for never asking me to stop dreaming." Sonia hugged him tightly. "Your dreams are my dreams, my son." At the airport, as they waited for their flight, Sonia looked at the passport in her hand. It was her first time leaving the country. The fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but it was now wrapped in a layer of hope. She looked out the window and saw the plane that would take them to their new life. It wasn't just a metal machine, it was a promise. The promise that no matter how dark the past, the future could still be bright. The first glimpse of Berlin from the plane window was a vast carpet of lights shimmering against the dark of night. For Sonia and Gabriel, who had never left the United States, the sight was otherworldly. The cold air that greeted them upon disembarking was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the humid heat of a New York summer. They were exhausted from the long journey, but the adrenaline of the new kept them going. In the airport arrivals hall, a man held a sign with Gabriel's name. He was an assistant from the Philharmonic, a pleasant young man who guided them through the crowd with quiet efficiency. Maestro Costello was waiting for them outside, next to a black car. Seeing him there, so far from home, was an immense relief for Sonia. He was the only familiar face on a continent of strangers. The apartment the Foundation had arranged for them was in Charlottenburg, a charming and peaceful neighborhood. It was larger than their old one, with wide windows that let in the pale light of the European autumn. It was furnished simply but comfortably. In the living room, occupying the place of honor, was a brand new upright piano. Gabriel's eyes widened. He approached it and played a single note, which sounded clear and perfect in the apartment's silence. "It's yours," the maestro said with a smile, "to practice whenever you want." That first week, everything was a discovery. The strange language, the different flavors, the customs. Sonia felt like a child learning to walk. With a map in hand and a pocket dictionary, she explored the streets around the apartment, discovering grocery stores, parks, and bakeries. The people were reserved but polite, and she gradually lost her fear of communicating with gestures and smiles. The real test came on Gabriel's first day at the conservatory, a historic building attached to the Philharmonic. The place breathed music and history. Through the halls, one could hear violin scales, flute arpeggios, and the deep sound of a cello. Gabriel felt both intimidated and at home. Maestro Costello introduced him to his new teacher, Frau Schmidt, a stern-looking woman with a tight bun and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She asked Gabriel to play something. He chose a piece by Bach. As he played, Frau Schmidt's expression didn't change, but her eyes, behind the lenses, were intense and focused. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You have fire and instinct," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But you lack technique and discipline. Raw talent is just the start. Here, hard work is what matters. We begin tomorrow, 8 o'clock sharp." Gabriel felt a thrill. It wasn't praise, but it was acknowledgement. He would be challenged, pushed to his limit, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't scared of it. He was eager. That night, as Sonia prepared dinner, the sound of the piano filled the new apartment. It was the sound of a new beginning, of a dream finally finding its place in the world. The months that followed were a total immersion. Gabriel's life became governed by a Spartan routine of discipline that he embraced with a voracious hunger. The lessons with Frau Schmidt were grueling. She dismantled his self-taught style, correcting his posture, the position of his fingers, his breathing. She demanded perfection and accepted nothing less. But beneath her austere exterior was a dedicated mentor who recognized the extraordinary gift in her student. Gabriel absorbed everything. He practiced for 8 and 10, 12 hours a day, until his fingers ached and his mind was empty of everything but music. Meanwhile, Sonia built her own life. She enrolled in an intensive German course, made friends with other mothers of foreign students, and discovered a talent for cooking that delighted her new neighbors. The news came on a spring afternoon. Maestro Costello invited them for coffee and, with a twinkle in his eye, made the announcement Gabriel had been chosen to play a small solo in a special Philharmonic concert, an event to showcase the conservatory's young talents. It would be his official debut on Europe's most important stage. The tension in the days leading up to the concert was almost unbearable. Gabriel barely ate, barely slept. He spent every waking moment at the piano, polishing each note of his piece, Chopin's Ballade Opus 1, a work that mirrored the journey of his own life, from turmoil to calm, from darkness to light. Sonia felt her son's nervousness as if it were her own. She surrounded him with quiet care, making sure he ate and rested, being the calm rock in his inner storm. On the night of the concert, the backstage of the Berlin Philharmonic buzzed with an electric energy. Sonia, sitting in the front row of the audience, clutched the program with damp hands. The hall was magnificent, a universe of red velvet and gold trim, filled with a silent, knowledgeable audience. When Gabriel's name was announced, her heart seemed to stop. In New York, in his empty office, Warren Sterling watched the concert's live stream on his computer. He didn't know why he was doing it. Perhaps it was a form of penance. The boy's face appeared on the screen, and Sterling held his breath. Gabriel walked to the center of the stage. He was no longer the cornered boy who had been humiliated at his party. There was a confidence in his walk, a calm in his expression. He gave an elegant bow to the audience, sat at the piano, and adjusted the bench. The silence in the hall was absolute. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then his fingers touched the keys. The first notes, somber and questioning, filled the air. The music unfolded, telling his story. There was the melancholy of his childhood, the fury of defiance, the tenderness of his mother's love, the joy of discovery. It was more than a performance. It was a testimony. He wasn't just playing Chopin's notes. He was infusing them with his own soul. The piece built to an overwhelming climax, a cascade of sound and emotion that had the audience leaning forward in their seats. And then, the end, with soft notes that seemed to float and disappear into the air, like a question finally answered. For a second, silence. And then, the hall erupted in applause. The ovation was thunder. The audience rose to its feet, shouting "Bravo!" in various languages. Sonia cried openly, tears of relief and pride streaming down her face. On stage, Gabriel, breathless, bowed repeatedly, a shy but radiant smile finally breaking his intense concentration. He searched for his mother's eyes in the audience, and the look they exchanged contained a universe of love and gratitude. Backstage, the celebration was more subdued but equally emotional. Frau Schmidt gave a rare smile and an approving nod. "Good work, Herr Gabriel," she said, the highest praise he had ever received from her. Maestro Costello embraced him. "This is only the beginning, my son. The world is listening now." The reviews in the next day's papers were unanimous. "A star is born," read one headline. "The soul of America in the heart of Berlin," read another. Gabriel's future, once an uncertain path in the dark, was now a wide, brightly lit avenue. A few weeks later, a small box arrived by mail at their apartment. The return address was Sterling Capital. Sonia hesitated to open it. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to let no shadow of the past enter their new life. But curiosity won. Inside, there was no valuable object, no expensive gift to buy her forgiveness. There was only a letter, written on company letterhead. The handwriting was stiff, almost forced. It was from Sterling. The letter was an apology. The words were carefully chosen, devoid of emotion. As if drafted by a lawyer, he admitted his behavior had been inappropriate and regrettable. He acknowledged Gabriel's exceptional talent and regretted the hardships he had caused. The letter went on to inform them that he had created a trust fund in Gabriel's name, managed by a neutral bank. It was a substantial sum, intended to cover all future educational expenses and ensure Sonia's financial stability. "Consider this not as a gift," Sterling wrote, "but as an attempt to restore a balance I disturbed." He briefly mentioned that the incident had forced him to reevaluate his business practices and personal priorities. Sonia read the letter twice. She felt no anger, no joy. She felt a kind of melancholy peace. The money meant nothing. They had already won, and not with his help, the community's support, the maestro's kindness, Gabriel's hard work. That was the currency that mattered. Their wealth was resilience. "Love on music," She folded the letter and put it in a drawer. It was the end of a chapter. Sterling's acknowledgement wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. They no longer needed his validation or his money. They were free. That night, as Gabriel practiced a new piece, the notes filling the apartment with complex beauty, Sonia looked out the window at the lights of Berlin. She remembered the fear she had felt upon arriving. Now, that fear was gone. Replaced by a sense of belonging, she had a home. Her son had a future, and they had achieved it together. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye, or perhaps in a musical crescendo. Life in Berlin became the new normal, a steady, harmonious rhythm. Gabriel, now a young adult, was a rising star in the firmament of classical music. His name appeared on the programs of the world's most prestigious theaters, but fame had not changed him. He retained the humility of someone who knew the value of silence, the same kindness in his eyes that his mother loved so much. The discipline learned from Frau Schmidt was now part of him, but the fire Maestro Costello had first seen in the subway station continued to be the essence of his art. He wasn't just a technically brilliant pianist, he was a storyteller, a poet of the ivory keys. Sonia had also flourished. After mastering German, she found her calling. With the help of friends she made in the city, she opened a small Latino cultural center. It was a piece of her world in Berlin, a place where homesickness was cured with empanadas, salsa classes, and of course, lots of music. She became a mother figure to the expat community, a bridge between two cultures. Her strength, once used for survival, was now used to nurture and connect. She was no longer Gabriel's mom, but Sonia from the center, an identity she had built with her own hands and her immense heart. On a sunny autumn afternoon, they sat at their favorite cafe, watching the golden leaves fall. Gabriel was back from a long tour in Asia. "I have an idea for the next tour," he said, stirring his coffee. "I want to end it in the States." Sonia's eyes lit up. "Of course, my son. Where do you want to play? Carnegie Hall? The Walt Disney Concert Hall in L.A.? Gabriel smiled. "Those too, but I want to do a special concert first, in the community center hall in our old neighborhood in Queens." The request moved Sonia deeply. It was proof that he had never forgotten where he came from, the hands that had reached out to help them when they needed it most. The final scene is not on a grand stage, but in a familiar place, filled with dear faces. Gabriel, elegant in his concert attire, sits at the piano in the small community hall. The audience is made up of his old neighbors, including an even whiter-haired Mrs. Rosa, all dressed in their Sunday best. Sonia is in the front row, beside Maestro Costello, who made a point of flying in for the occasion. Gabriel looks up, meets his mother's eyes, and begins to play.